Hi guys, and welcome to your third lesson within the Professional Diploma in Project Management. Today we are going to be talking about defining the project plan. Now your project plan is a very vital document that will be carried through from the start to the end of your project. But before we dive into that, let's talk about today's fun fact. And it is, did you know that more than 16 million people regard project management as their profession? So there's definitely some appeal there, so you're all on the right track to starting a great and exciting career in project management. While I have your attention, I just wanted to run through the different ways that you can access your courses. Firstly, you can use our website and you'll find your courses under your courses page. You can also use the app if you like to live life on the go. And then you can also manage your class schedule and reschedule any lessons if you need to miss one. And then also remember that there are recordings of each lesson that you can access anytime, anywhere. Just to recap on Morpheus, remember that you can ask Morpheus questions at any point during your lesson and he will try and answer the question for you. If Morpheus cannot answer your question, remember that you can email us at support@shoreacademy.com and I will generally get back to you within the next 48 hours. Please also remember to rate the responses so that we can improve them and make this a better experience for all of you. Just to recap on Lesson 2, we spoke about how to identify scope, determining project goals and objectives, understanding deliverables and milestones, feasibility studies, creating a stakeholder register, and creating a project charter. Now that we're all up to speed, let's move on to Lesson 3, defining the project plan. In today's lesson, we want to answer the question, what is a project plan? I'd like to introduce you all to work breakdown structures. We will be discussing defining tasks, work packages, and we will explore project dependencies. This will include the sequencing of activities, different estimation techniques that can be used for time, network diagrams and resource planning, task lists, resource plans, and developing a project schedule. So there's lots of great stuff in this lesson, so I hope you're all ready to learn some awesome new stuff. Let's get started. What is a project plan? A project plan is a document used to control the execution of your project. In other words, it's a formal document that is going to guide and control the execution of your project, and it's going to be a key resource in the success of your project. It's going to clearly define the goals of your project, the goal being the end result that you wish to achieve. It's going to clearly define the plan in which you're going to use in order to achieve these goals. In other words, all the different steps that will need to be accomplished in order to achieve this goal. And then your project plan is more of a living document than anything else. So as your project moves along, so your project plan will adapt to any changes that are made. Remember when we discussed scope creep, we said that it is vital to keep all of your documentation up to date. This very much applies to your project plan. Your project plan will consist of many different elements, all of which we will be discussing throughout today's lesson. Firstly, we have your task list, and this will break down any big chunks of work into little pieces so we can identify the scope and the time required for our project. Then we have work breakdown structures, and these are hierarchy diagrams that take the bigger chunks of work and visually show how they are broken down into smaller tasks. We will be discussing dependencies. Essentially what this means is tasks that can't start or finish without the previous task starting or finishing. In other words, they are dependent on one another. If the one isn't complete, the next one can't start. Then we will be discussing resource planning. And this is based around the idea of using your staff members as resources and how to evaluate where they are available and how much time you will need them for. And finally, we will be talking about the project schedule. Essentially what this means is how long your project will take and the order in which things will be executed. Let's start off with work breakdown structures. Before you get started on your work breakdown structure, you will need to define your tasks. So you'll need to identify and document all activities that need to be performed in order to achieve your project goal. So each individual item of work that together complete your project goal. This process promotes creating summary tasks, which are a collection of smaller subtasks, and your subtasks are a combination of different work packages. Now your work packages are the smallest amount of work that can be accomplished within your project. Or rather the smallest chunks of work that can be completed within your project. Activities are typically small segments of work, and these can usually be completed in a few hours or at maximum about a day's worth of work. This just relates back to the scope of the activity or the task that you're doing, so generally it would be considered an activity if it is under a day. On the left here you'll see an example of a work breakdown structure, but let's dig a little bit deeper into the theory first. Your work breakdown structures are used to break projects down into more manageable sections. So rather than just saying, we need to build a website, you're actually breaking it down into the smaller steps that need to be accomplished in order to build your website. The sections are organized into a hierarchical structure, meaning that the biggest tasks or the most important things are at the top, and then it breaks down into smaller subtasks. The further down a work breakdown structure you go, the more details are available. As you can see on your left, you start off with project, and then underneath that is task 1, 2, and 3. And then under each of these summary tasks, we've got our subtasks, and that will provide the detail of the exact steps that you need to take in order to achieve that task, which will eventually achieve your project goal. In terms of our website, your project would be to build a website. Task 1 could be to build your home page. Task 2 could be to build your About Us page. And Task 3 could be where your users actually buy your shoes. Now under task 1, you would need to have your home screen, so you'd need to design that, you'd need to code that, you need to come up with content for it, copyright it. All these things would fall under your subtasks and your work packages. And your deliverables are broken down into sub-deliverables and eventually work packages. Now remember that work packages are the smallest chunk of work within your project. Then we have summary tasks, which we've discussed briefly already, but let's dive a little bit deeper into that. Your summary tasks are high-level tasks that are also known as parent tasks. The term parent task comes from more of the IT side of project management, but I think it's quite a good visual when we move on to subtasks. So yes, summary tasks can also be known as parent tasks. Your summary tasks are going to assist in navigating your different task groups. They will show you the sequence in which things need to happen for your project to be successful. And then they can also present your milestones, so the sequence in which your project is executed, and also represent project phases if you're moving from planning to execution. For the purposes of breaking down work breakdown structures, I will be using the scenario of planning a business meeting. On a generic work breakdown structure, you'd start off with your project name, and then we can break that down into 3 different summary tasks. Now for the purposes of this lesson, we are going to run through planning a business meeting. So we'll start off here by going status meeting, and then break that down into 3 summary tasks. The first being the stakeholders, agenda, and venue. So identifying stakeholders, deciding what the meeting is going to entail, and where you're going to have the meeting. Now that we have the summary tasks, we need to see what needs to be done in order to decide which stakeholders we're inviting, what we're going to be talking about in the meeting under agenda, and finally the venue for our meeting. So subtasks are more broken down descriptions of your summary tasks. They are going to be your sub-dependents. In other words, your subtask is dependent on your summary task, and that is why we use the term parent and child, so you can't have a child without the parent. If we look at this again, now we've got project name, our summary task, subtask 1.1, because you can have multiple subtasks underneath a summary task. Then we've got subtask 1.2, and under that we've got another one, subtask 1.3. So you need to number your subtasks as well for easy reference later on in your project, because you can have hundreds of subtasks. So having a well-organized numbering system can also help you link up to a task list later. Now I've got a pop question for all of you. What task do you think you need to accomplish in order to organize a meeting venue? So what steps do you think need to be done in order to book a venue for our meeting? So we'll start off with meeting. Then our summary task will be finding a venue. Underneath that we'll have firstly to decide on a venue. Our second subtask will be to book that venue. And our third subtask will be to prepare the venue. So we need to organize a meeting. In order to do this, we need to find a venue. Then we need to decide on a venue, book the venue, and prepare the venue. So that is a prime example of summary tasks and their subtasks that are associated with them. I've also mentioned work packages already within this lesson, so let's break that down a little bit further. Your work packages allow for larger pieces of work to be broken down into smaller, more manageable chunks. So rather than just saying, organize a venue, you're breaking it down into the smaller steps that need to be accomplished in order to do that. It's going to allow multiple team members to focus on different aspects of the project that are inevitably going to come together. What we mean by this is you can have one resource working on a work package under one summary tasks, and later in the day they can work on another aspect that falls within their speciality group. When reviewing a work breakdown structure, the work packages are elements that cannot be broken down further. They are the most basic of tasks, and there are no tasks below them. And they are often grouped into areas of expertise, and this can be technology, human resources, or finance. If you work within technology, for example, your work packages will all fall into your area of expertise within technology. Just to show you visually, here we've got our project name, our summary task, then underneath we've got our subtask 1.1, then we have subtask 1.2, then just to add a bit of interest, we've got our first work package. Now notice with the numbering how we've gone from subtask 1.2 to work package 1.2.1 because our work package belongs specifically to subtask 1.2. Then we've got our subtask 1.3, and under that we now have 3 different work packages. So the first would be work package 1.3.1, then we have 1.3.2 and 1.3.3. So we can see already that all of these work packages link directly back to subtask 1.3. Now, like everything in life, work packages have rules, and the first is that you should never exceed a 10-day duration. Your work packages should be independent of other work packages in the work breakdown structure, meaning you don't want them to have to rely on other work packages being completed. They are standalone tasks until they are completed. They should be unique, and you should not duplicate them across your work breakdown structure. In other words, rather have one person doing the design of a certain element rather than having 5 people doing the same job in different places. When the one person's now figured it out, they can simply go and duplicate that work or alter the work to fit in with the other work packages. Our project is to host a meeting. Within that, we need to arrange a venue. So first we'll decide upon the venue as subtask 1. We will book our venue. And within that, we'll need to see which venues are available. So our work package will be assessing availability. And then once we've done that, we can send out our invitations. Then returning back to subtasks, we'll also have to prepare the venue. And the work packages associated with that will be arranging seating for the attendees, organizing refreshments, and configuring the projector within the meeting room. So as you can see, it is quite an easy process to follow. But just remember as well that later on you will be needing to include numbers as well because you want to be able to track things easily later on. Let's take all of this one step further and build upon our original work breakdown structure. And we'll break that down into our first summary task, which will be stakeholders. We'll then move on to our subtask of identifying our key stakeholders. In other words, the key members that we need to be included in this meeting. And you can use your interest versus influence matrix in order to identify these stakeholders. Subtask 2 will be to email them the agenda for your meeting. And then subtask 3 will be reviewing who will be attending or your RSVPs. Our second summary task will be agenda. And under agenda, our first subtask will be select a facilitator. In other words, who will be running the meeting. Subtask 2 will be to create the agenda. Our next summary task will be our venue, and under that we have subtask 1, which is deciding upon a venue. Our second subtask would be to book the venue. Then off of that we have our first work package, which is assessing availability, and our second work package to send invitations. Once that's done, we will return to our original flow and then prepare the venue, and under that we have our next 3 work packages. Firstly, to arrange seating. Secondly, to arrange refreshments, and then to configure our projector. Now, why do we do all of this? Why have a work breakdown structure in the first place? Well, our top tip for today is that all tasks required in a project need to be identified. Why is that? Because I've warned you about all of this, because that is how you end up with scope creep. You need to know exactly what you need to do and the scope of your project, and a work breakdown structure is a prime way to display this. When reviewing a work breakdown structure, which element cannot be broken down further? You all should know this, I've said it many, many times. Is it A, your summary tasks, B, your work packages, or C, your subtasks? You can go ahead and type your answer into Morpheus now. And I hope you all got this. The answer is B, work packages. Well done if you got that right. The next thing we will be discussing is project dependencies. Once activities have been identified and documented, the next step is to identify any relationships between activities. In other words, are there any links? This can be linked back to our summary task for stakeholders earlier. We said that we cannot send out the agenda until we know which stakeholders we are inviting. So that created a dependency or a relationship between the tasks. Your activity relationships have 4 different styles or different relationships. The first is finish to start. Then there's finish to finish, start to start, and start to finish. These relationships are going to be applied when we work in network diagrams. The best way for you to understand these different relationship types is to see them visually, and we'll be doing that in the next few moments. But before we do, I'd just like to discuss outlining dependencies. When outlining dependencies, you need to remember that there are preceding tasks and succeeding tasks. Preceding being the task that needs to happen first, and succeeding the task that follows that. So preceding happens first, and succeeding happens second. And also that your tasks may have multiple different preceding tasks and multiple succeeding tasks. Now what this means is that it doesn't have to be only one single preceding task. There can be 5 different things that need to be done in order for you to move on to the next step within your project. And also what it means is that if you finish one task, it may unlock several succeeding tasks that can happen once you've done the preceding task. Now, as promised, let's talk through these different relationships. So first on our list is going to be the finish to start. Now, this is the most common relationship you'll find and the most logical dependency that you will find within project management. So here we see we have our preceding task, our predecessor, and our successor. In this scenario, you will only be able to start your succeeding task once your preceding task is finished. So only once task A is done can you move on to task B. If we link this back to our website example, you can then say that only once you have designed your site can you then move on to developing it. The next dependency we need to discuss is our start to start. What this means is that your task B cannot start until task A has started. Once both tasks have been initiated, they can still finish at different times. It's just vital that they start at the same time. An example of this would be once you start developing your site, you will also need to start building a database of all the different shoes you'd like to sell. So even though developing your site as the preceding task may take longer, you can still complete your succeeding task at a different time. The next relationship is a finish to finish dependency. And this means that your succeeding task cannot finish unless the preceding task is also finished. So the development of your website cannot be finished until your database is finished, because your development team is relying on the database being intact before they can take this website live and complete all the functionality that you would like to have. And last but not least, we have our start to finish dependency. Now this one can get a bit tricky, and essentially what happens is your successor cannot start until your predecessor has started. In other words, if you start with task A, only once task A has started can you begin working on task B. What I'd like to do now is look at our work breakdown structure again. Now thinking back at what we've just done, did you spot any dependencies? So have a quick look and see if any of these tasks are relying on another task to be completed before they can start. Okay, the first one I found was that we have a successor task, which is emailing the agenda, and the predecessor is creating the agenda. So we need to create the agenda in order to email the agenda to our stakeholders. So our agenda will need to be finished before we can start emailing. So that will be a finish to start relationship or dependency there. Let's break it down one more time. So we need to finish creating our agenda before we can go ahead and email it to our stakeholders. So creating the agenda will be once that's done, so that'll be finish. And successor, once it's finished, we can start. So it'll be a finish to start relationship. Now there's one more dependency in here. Has anyone else spotted it? Let's go and have a look. So it will be preparing your venue. Only once you know how many people are attending will you be able to organize a venue. So in order to prepare your venue, you need to review your RSVPs first. So this again will be a finish to start relationship. Let's talk about different estimation techniques. Now that we've discussed work breakdown structures, let's talk about different ways in which we can estimate activity durations. The first technique we'll be discussing is the bell curve technique. So this utilizes normal distribution. Now for anyone who's confused by the term normal distribution, what this means is that it's the closest to the mean or medium as possible. In other words, the average. The top of the curve is going to show you the most likely events, or the most likely thing to happen from any data that you've gathered. Then after you've calculated your mean or average, you can then apply your standard deviations. Now what a standard deviation is it depicts the return of a security, and then that is known as volatility. So what are the chances, what are the other outcomes that could happen if you don't achieve your mean? Let's look at this in the context of the meeting we've been planning with our work breakdown structure. The first thing you'll notice is we've got an X and a Y axis, and we've got our bell curve shape, which gives it its name, that it looks like a bell. The first thing we want to do is identify the lowest outcome and the highest outcome, and once we've got those, we can then identify our average. If we look at this in the context of our meeting, we can say that the shortest amount of time our meeting could take is 15 minutes, and the longest it could take is 45 minutes, which means that between those two elements, 30 minutes would be our average time. This would then help us decide how long we should book the meeting venue for, and in this case we would go with half an hour or 30 minutes. This is a very handy technique that is used throughout project management, and as we progress through this course you will see more advanced bell curves in the lessons. The next thing I want to talk about is the Delphi technique. Now this is quite an interesting one, and the basis around this is that you gather a bunch of different experts within your project and you ask them their opinion on how long something should take or how much it should cost. So in this scenario you could take how long it's going to take to plan your project and ask them to provide you with what they think the timeline should be. Now the value in this is that they will then anonymously submit their answers based on a questionnaire that you've handed out to them. And why it's valuable to have this as an anonymous questionnaire is because then no one can be intimidated by someone higher up in the chain than they are, and it will promote honest answers without negative consequences coming of it. Once you've gathered your initial results, so the initial questionnaire, you can then distribute the different answers anonymously back to your participants, who will then look and maybe they've missed something or haven't considered something, at which point they will then provide you with a revised estimate in most cases, and from that you can then narrow down what your expected timeline should be. Now the important thing to remember is that after you've completed all these rounds of questionnaires, that the average will be your answer to the question. So once you've compiled everyone's answers, the average estimate will become your overall estimate for this task within your project. Another interesting technique is called the bottom-up technique, and the basis of this is that your project will be broken down into smaller manageable sections, and once it's been broken down, the staff resource that is responsible for the activity or task will provide you with their time estimate. And your overall estimates of all these smaller tasks will then build up into your overall project timeline. What makes this process unique is that you are informed by your resource how long something should take rather than you advising them on their timeline. This can be valuable if your resource is a subject matter expert and maybe has more knowledge on the specific area than you do, so you can make sure that you are making smart goals within your project and setting reasonable expectations. Now, along with using these techniques, there's something else we all need to consider, and that is your calendars. The two types of calendars we're going to talk about now are resource calendars and company calendars. Firstly, we're going to talk about resource calendars, and this details working and non-working time of specific staff members. This will include the hours that they're in the office, if they have any days where they work half days. This will be an accumulation of the hours that they have available to you. Now, when I say non-working time, this can be broken down into their vacation days, into public holidays, or even maternity or paternity leave. Now, the value in having these resource calendars is it allows project managers to see their resources availability. I want Susan to do this task for me. Is she now available? And it's also nice because it can show records of previous work. If I need Susan to design a website for me that's very similar to a previous project she's done, I can then base my estimates on how long it took her to do the previous website. Then we've also got company calendars. Now, within a company calendar, this is going to detail your non-working days or segments of time. These will also include public holidays, maybe the year-end closure of your company. Maybe you work for a really nice company that gives you, if there's a public holiday after a weekend, they give you that Monday off. All these things will be included in your company calendar. Now, these will include your weekends, public holidays, conferences that the company may be hosting, any team building, and any meetings. Well, enough about estimating time. Let's talk about some network diagrams and resource planning. Firstly, what is a network diagram? Well, a network diagram is the sequence in which things will be executed within your project. Now, why it's valuable is because it can show you visually the different dependencies within your project. So if we're taking our website as an example, we can see that our first activity is going to be registering a domain name. Our second is going to be designing the website. Our third is going to be coding the website. Fourth, we're going to decide upon our web hosting. E, we are going to register our copyright. And F, we are going to go live. So you can see on the far right, I've got preceding activities. So we cannot start with activity B until activity A is done. Coding the website or activity C is also dependent on A. Then we've said that the web hosting is dependent on the web design being done. And our copyright cannot go ahead without our website having been coded. And we need activity E and D to be done in order for us to host the website or to go live. Now, that can be quite confusing in a table format, but let's look at this in a network diagram. So firstly, we've got A, registering our domain name. Then we see from registering our domain name, we can now move on to our succeeding tasks, which will be to B, design the website, and then C, code the website. Once the website's designed, we can then move on to our web hosting. And once our website is coded, we can move on to our copyright. And finally, once everything else is done, we can go live. So it's just a much simpler visual representation of our list of activities that we need to complete. Now, speaking about our task list, let's break this down. So first, we've got activity. Now, you can either use an alphabetic order here, or you can use a numeric order. For this purposes of this, I've just used A through F. So rather than writing down in your network diagram the specific task, you rather just represent it with an alphabetic character. Then we've got our description, not even a sentence, just your keywords of what it is that you need to accomplish alongside your activity number. Next, we have duration and hours. Now, who's been paying attention? What 3 techniques can we use in order to estimate the duration of a task? You should know this by now. And your answer is that it is the Delphi technique, the bottom-up technique, and the bell curve technique that you can use in order to come up with these estimates. And next, which team member are you going to assign to the different task? Now, within your team member allocation, this is when you can go back into your resource calendars and evaluate how long it takes them to complete different tasks, as well as the quality of the tasks that they have done. This process can be quite intricate in terms of making sure that you have resources available to you, and in this scenario, we've managed to have each person on their own individual task. Just to speak a bit more about resource planning, let's look at a resource plan. So we'll start off with our task. So register a domain name. We know that Sue is doing it, and we'd like her to start on the 2nd of November 2020, and she will finish it on the same day on the 2nd of November, and we've said it's going to take about 2 hours. For designing the website, we've chosen Claire, and she is going to work on that for 1 day, starting on the 2nd of November and ending on the 3rd, because typically a work day is about 8 hours, so we've carried over to the next day. Then for coding the website, we've chosen Tabo, and he is going to start on the 4th of November and finish on the 9th, because he has got 36 hours of work to do. Now this could be based on the complexity of the website that he's building, and that would have come into your original estimates there. And in terms of the bottom-up approach, we could also have just asked Tabo, this is what we need you to do, how long is it going to take? And he could then have given us 36 hours. In terms of the copywriting, Rajesh is going to go and make sure that everything is perfect, and he is going to do this in 1 working day or 8 hours on the 10th of November. Then we've got hosting the website, and that is going to be done by Malika, and she is going to do that over the course of 3 hours on the 11th of November. And lastly, the go live is going to be handled by Carlo, and that is going to take 3 hours. So we can see that our project begins execution on the 2nd and finishes on the 11th of November. That's just quite an easy, simple example for all of you to follow. And I hope this all makes sense, and just think of different ways that you can apply your different estimation techniques that we covered earlier in the lesson. Let's talk about developing a project schedule. The first thing you want to do is control your project schedule. Now this will be inclusive of monitoring the status of your RAG activities. For those of you who don't remember, RAG represents red, amber and green, and this will highlight different statuses within tasks in your project. It's going to allow you to implement changes or solutions for activity that have gone over the estimations that you originally provided. In this case, if Tabo ends up taking 40 hours instead of 36 hours, you need to accommodate for that in your project schedule. You've now exceeded your original estimate, and that needs to be accommodated for within your project plan and your project schedule. Within this as well, you're going to have to recognize and identify risks and also plan your risk responses, whether they be preventative, so rather never have the risk occur, or whether you have a potential risk and you plan a strategy for if it occurs. Now that's quite a broad overview of how one would go about creating a project plan. We will be delving deeper into this within your next modules and throughout this module as well. But for now, let's talk about a few different softwares you can use so that you can all go and practice your work breakdown structures and network diagrams at home. The softwares that I would suggest include Lucidchart, SmartDraw, Smartsheet, and also Microsoft Visio. Now most of these include a 30-day free trial or a week free trial that you can use. And also remember that you can also manually draw these in Microsoft Word or another word editor that allows you to insert shapes. I would suggest just going home and creating a work breakdown structure for a function that you use in everyday life, and remember to use your numbering system as well. I can't believe we've just finished lesson 3, but let's talk about what is coming up in lesson 4. Within lesson 4, we are going to continue talking about project planning. We're going to talk about cost management, the 4 main phases of cost management, some more estimation techniques that apply more to cost than time management, and quality management. So there's a lot of information packed into lesson 4, and I think you guys are going to learn a ton of new stuff. Now to summarize today's lesson, we've covered project planning, and within that we've discussed our work breakdown structures, which are used to break down tasks into more manageable pieces. We've spoken about task dependencies, estimating resources and duration, that being inclusive of the Delphi technique, the bell curve technique, and the bottom-up technique. We've also spoken about task lists, resource plans, and developing a project schedule. And lastly, we covered a few different suggested softwares. I'd like to say a big thank you for attending lesson 3, and I hope you've all had a fantastic time and learned something new. And I'll see you soon for lesson 4. Lastly, just a reminder to please